Yeah, Jason, what should we start out by saying before we get into any of the content or any of the kind of things you wanted to do with them?
Um, well, Alina and I were talking about this before folks joined, that this was probably the core set of ideas for what we're now calling the big book. So we released this one just to get these things out in the wild. So to see how people react to them, how they use them, what questions they have, stuff like that. And the big book is tentatively scheduled for some undetermined date in the future. We spent a lot of time going back and forth on trying to put a lot of context and history about how all these things came to be. And it was proving very difficult to write something about a topic that is non-linear in a linear book. So we decided, let's just put these ideas out here and see how people react to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and a good bit of this is at least within the organization I work at, this company called Insight that's based out of Phoenix, tried and tested there within that context. So what you might hear out of us a little bit tonight is that we share stories about kind of how we've been using this. It probably likely will be context from that company as we go through.
So I was starting to read your book a little bit, and the story that you started with is that you can share your personal experience that you've been part of agile transformations for so many years, and you were saying that we've got to do agile this way, and then you realized at some point that the rigidity of the frameworks make everything just worse, and not successful. And with that, the idea was born that there could be a different ways, and you start collaborating with Jason on it.
Yeah, in the book, I don't know if anybody's aware of the book, but it's the 6 big ideas of adaptive organizations. And in that book, the first chapter is my story, Ken's story, basically. And in there, I write about how my own personal transformation took me from being the kind of traditional kind of Scrum Master, Agile coach that when people weren't doing it well or right, I would kind of do something that would be the equivalent of taking them to the Scrum Guide and going like, hey, this is how it works, or this is what you should do, or hey, this is the Agile Manifesto, this is what it's saying. And that was probably pre-2019, pre-pandemic in a way. And I had done that for probably close to 10 years or so or more. And it worked kind of, but here and there, and not really. And I didn't have a lot of good answers other than just, hey, that's not what Scrum is, or this is what the Scrum Guide says, and all those kind of things. And so that was pretty standard. I mean, my understanding of it, even after 10 years, was still pretty limited. I think it took me finally realizing that I didn't know as much as I thought I did, and it wasn't working as well as I thought it was, for me to finally realize that I had to do something different. And so I started to slowly but surely kind of wean myself off of frameworks altogether. Actually, not really even talking about Agile anymore either. And I know that might be, I know there's a lot going on in the industry, and people are on various sides of the fence about Agile and all that stuff. But for me, it was more about just trying to kind of decouple my thinking from a thing, like selling a thing, and believing in it so much that I was kind of getting dogmatic in how I was applying it and trying to help other people. And that was a big part of all of this. Meeting Jason back in late 2020 and learning from him and so on, and then ultimately getting to all this content in a book, and then another book, hopefully soon. Don't hold us to it though. I mean, we're going to get there eventually. All right. I think we had started, there's a good bit here. We're going to just feel a little bit of this out, and then we really want this to be some dialogue. I think if anybody was here last year when I was here, You'll know that my style might be quite different in some ways. Like I'm going to put something in front of you. I'm going to say a few things about it. And then I would like for us to talk about it, chat about it, ask questions, provide your thoughts, tell us about your context and how it's resonating with you, those kind of things. So I think with that, we could probably start it on something. Let me also say too, that a good bit of these topics are pretty deep. So you're gonna like first time you see it, it's gonna be kind of you'll understand it in a superficial way, most likely. And then you'll start to think more about it. We'll start to talk more about it, and then you'll start to uncover it. It's like peeling back layers of an onion in a way. And somewhat it's intentionally built that way because these are sense-making techniques. So they're gonna help you make sense over time. Anything else, Jason? What should we add? Should we just get into it?
Let's give her.
All right. Let's go to this one. This one's kind of a problem statement. I'm going to try to make this as big as I can on my screen here. Hopefully that's big enough on your screen. And I'll just kind of start at the left. I'm going to say about the least amount I can about all these things here. Tie the story together kind of minimally, and then I'm going to see how y'all feel about it. See what we have to say. This is a sense-making technique that we've called how does your system change? And on the left-hand side, you're going to see this big target. And if we think about this, society runs on the exchange of currency. And so everybody needs money and every business needs money. But the big difference in those statements is how we go about making that money. So some businesses will believe they succeed through kind of getting and keeping control, and other businesses will believe that they succeed and generate revenue through human-centric behavioral patterns. Now, the next bit over, VUCA, hopefully everybody's pretty familiar with that term. This is really kind of the characteristics of work in the 21st century. And I would say that VUCA is what's trying to stop us from doing the thing on the left, which society says we have to do, which is make money. But if we get really good at handling change and adapting to the change that comes and knocks on our door in a kind of an uncontrollable way, we'll do perfectly fine with keeping to kind of generate that money. But if we don't, and we're not very good at it, then it's likely it'll start to cause us some problems. And so then problems will kind of creep up throughout our organization. I feel like we should probably stop there and maybe not go through the whole thing. Is there anything that is kind of landing on your brain right now, even just from these first two bits of it?
Need to make money makes sense.
Okay, I'll keep going then. Now, this one I'm going to zoom in just a little bit for because it's a little bit smaller. But if you take all those individual threads of VUCA and you kind of weave them together, and then you think about the things inside of your own organization, the dynamics and all the characteristics there, and then you think about all the things outside of your organization that are uncontrollable in society, all the dynamics there, like industry, market, competitor type things. The complexity that's described in VUCA tends to start to become more like chaos, especially nowadays. And so then as those things all get woven together in that loom of chaos in the center, what comes out the other side is opportunity. Opportunity to deploy a strategy that will handle that VUCA given your own context. So we can do things like, well, when times get tough, we can kind of hunker down and seek stability. But we often will run the risk of producing behavioral patterns in our organizations that we would probably look at and go, oh, well, they're just following orders. They're just waiting for instructions and they're not being very innovative or creative. And so when we give them instructions, then they'll go and use their hands to then complete those activities. So that's one way you could handle a type of VUCA, but it's likely to not work very well, especially if there's higher levels of complexity. But I like to think of complexity on a scale. So on one end of the scale, we can be predictable. That would be a low amount of VUCA. On the other end, we can't be predictive because things are either too complex or too chaotic, and therefore stability wouldn't work in that case, at least not very well. And then you can go up from there in the deployable strategy. So you can, hey, if the followers don't work, if that doesn't fit your situation well, then we could say, okay, well, we could try to motivate people through incentivization. We want them to be ambitious. But we might run the risk of producing individualism, which might be viewed as heroism. And so we might encourage those heroes to go out and solve a lot of problems with their brains and use their hands because they're pretty good problem solvers. But at the end of the day, we may also run the risk of siloing information and decision-making. We may be innovative and creative, but it may be in small pockets and it may not be sustainable. And so the heroism tends to not last very long when higher levels of complexity are present. And then the next rung up would be connection. So we can try to solve VUCA and chaotic problems with human connection. And this will require us to make sure that we have a sense of transparency in the system so that people can actually understand what's going on. And they can get together and collaborate and have some common purpose to be able to shoot for. And that requires us to work more from an empathetic standpoint, that more of that human centricity, but then to also collectively use our brains and our hands together to solve problems. And then lastly, at the top, adaptability. Adaptability would be where we are actually building structures that are highly adaptable, encouraging people to be disruptive because we know we can't stand still and be stagnant, but we actually need the behavioral patterns of disruption in not only the organization, but in the people. But this requires us to use another body part, and that is essentially our vision, or this idea that we have a vision and a purpose is not only as an individual, but it matches and aligns well with those around us, so that we can all be heading in a direction that is human-centric and allows us to collectively use our brains and collectively use our hands to get somewhere. Okay, so that was the quickest version I've ever given of this in my life. So I'm going to go back to just putting it all on the screen here. And then, Jason, what would you add to what has already been said?
We're probably going to transition to it, but an important thing is that the cultural tolerance for the type of behaviors that you get. Mm-hmm. So some environments and some cultures will respond not as well to disruptive behavior compared to others. So it's not that we're going to follow one strategy and we're always going to get those behaviors. It's a combination of all four of those things that we're going to end up with. And it's the combination of those four things that I don't want to say will make the change succeed or fail because it's more complicated than that. But that will help shape the approach that we take for how we do the change, depending on what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did have a question about that because a lot of times you see the personas, what you call behaviors, personas really going from left to right, but you're saying that it's moving the other way. And I was wondering if there could be a combination of these types of things and it could move from left to right rather than the way that you have it. Because you're saying it seems like the disruptor is kind of the all-encompassing persona that does everything, and then the hero wouldn't do anything else necessarily, but it doesn't seem to me that would always be the case. So
correct. Yes.
Trying to make sense of it.
I would even say it's situational. I don't know about you all, but there are times when given a situation, the context around that situation, I may show up as a follower. I may show up as a hero. I try my best not to do those two things because I don't think in the environments that I'm typically in that it's all that conducive to the outcomes that we're trying to collectively achieve. But at the end of the day, there are still times when I show up as a hero and or a follower. I try to make those contextually appropriate times though. What I try to do more often is show up as that collaborator although I tend to have a default of a little bit of a rebel. So I tend to show up as a disruptor probably more than anything. And sometimes I'll show up as a disruptor when I shouldn't. And that is still a mismatch. I'm showing up in an environment that what I tend to do is actually unlock this and then move it up and down. Here, let me move this off to the side for a second. So let's say I'm in an organization that's highly ambitious. Like, this is the way my company works, or this is the way my department works, or this is the expectations that my leader has of me. But yet my behavioral patterns can actually kind of move up and down that ambition level. Because if I'm in an ambitious organization and I show up as a disruptor, what am I doing to the system of that context? Is it a good thing that I show up as a disruptor, or is it going to be a bad thing as I show up as a disruptor? It depends on what we're trying to achieve and what my understanding of my role and others, what they believe of my role or what I'm supposed to be doing in that situation. And if they expect me to be the disruptor, then it's probably going to go well, because I'm going to show up as a disruptor, even if I'm in an ambitious context. And in fact, that's what's going on right now at Insight, at the company I work for. We're a highly ambitious company that has spent a few years doing things in ways that have partially worked and partially not. And leadership would like to try to get the things that are not working to work better. And they've tried a few times to do it on their own, but what they were doing is they were following the standard model. They were getting a lot of heroism, and they were getting mostly everyone else as followers. So the change that they were trying to kind of trickle down through the organization wasn't going all that well for some things. Other things, it was going great. But for the things that they really want to kind of improve, it wasn't going all that well. Now insert the disruptor. The disruptor is going to come in and essentially do things completely unlike everyone else in the system. The disruptor is going to come in and say, rules, I don't care about those rules. When we follow the rules, things tend to not work. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically ignore all the rules, and we're going to go over here and we're going to do the things we know should work and will get us to a better place. And then once we can prove that it's working, we're going to go back and show how it worked and why it worked. And then we're going to see if people are convinced that they should start to change their ways too. So that's a disruptor showing up in a very ambitious organization.
Yeah, thank you. I thought it needed to be a little bit more fluid than just the one way that you showed. So that's good to see.
Yeah.
You can shift it around.
Yeah, this is like the default basically. And then from there you start to figure out, okay, what's the strategy that's being deployed by the powers that be in the organization? Because people control things. It's typically not us. And then from there we got to figure out, okay, how should we show up? And the way I'm showing up, is it out of context, or is it a mismatch with the expected behavioral patterns that are there? Who sees this in your I'm assuming most of the folks, if not everybody here, is kind of in the agile industry or in some way, shape, or form. As you work in your organization, how is this resonating with you for your context and what you're having to kind of coach through or help in the organization with from a change perspective as it pertains to agile, scrum, agility, whatever you want to call it?
I've seen strong correlations with the alignment that you're showing here. When you reinforce adaptability, you encourage and cultivate disruptors. When you reinforce stability, you cultivate followers, right? I've definitely seen those correlations culturally in terms of the behavioral patterns that are rewarded or that are praised kind of from top down. Definitely reinforces those, and the people who resonate with those feel the most comfortable. So I've definitely seen that happen, but within a team, you can shift that, right? By introducing different reward patterns, by celebrating different values, then you can start to shift folks, how they show up. You can have folks show up in more of a collaborative way when you emphasize connection, when you reinforce that as a positive when you reinforce the positive outcomes of that, I've definitely seen those correlations.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else?
Hey, Ken, this is Chris Vestal. What I noticed is on the right-hand side, you kind of have it off frame, but the follower, you're always a follower. You're not always a disruptor. The hand that follows, or that you have to have the capability of being a follower.
You mean like in your toolbox?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. Like I was saying earlier, for me, it does depend on context. There's some subjects, possibly even some people. I don't know about you all, but is there that one person you guys are like, yeah, I don't know. Every time that person shows up and starts saying things, I get kind of squirrely. You know, there's something about that. I'm not really sure what it is. They don't sit right with me. They don't say things in the way that resonates with me, or they're trying to work against the things that I want to be doing, and that just doesn't sit right with me. Whatever the case may be, there's those times are going to cause me to show up in different ways, where in turn I might need to show up in a way that's more conducive to what's going on, but emotionally I've gotten myself into a pickle, and I can't show up in any other way than how I have.
Yeah. Well, look on
given that context.
the top row kind of indicates dynamic range. That's what it means to me. Like you start understanding as a follower, right? That's kind of a lower dynamic range. That's all you have the capability of doing, perhaps, right? You're just a follower.
Mhm.
But as you become more adaptable, you're adding the ability to think with your head and your heart, and then you can create a vision. You feel comfortable. That may be more of a comfort thing than anything. I don't know. That's just my sense of this, just the first glance at it. It's really cool. I love this stuff.
Yeah, I like the way you're thinking about it, Chris.
It's really making me think, and it is resonating, but not strongly enough yet for me to I need to examine it some more and kind of sleep on it.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody remembers what I said at the beginning. I was like, this is, you kind of got to peel it back over time.
Yeah.
You hear it the first time and it's going to feel like, okay, like logically I get it. But there's so much richness to it that you do kind of have to sit with it. Yeah.
I love polarities, and I see that play all throughout here, or potentially, and that may be me projecting polarities on top. So don't pay too close of attention.
And I think that's what's great about these models. That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to build sense-making techniques that don't give you all the answers.
Gotcha.
And doesn't even pretend to give you the answers in a way, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're just trying to put a construct there for people to think, and to think more deeply than they probably ever have before about their context.
I'll add one other thing and then I'll be quiet. I don't know if you know Andrew Kalman. He's over in Finland these days. But interestingly, he has VUCA, and then he has like the corollary to VUCA, similar to what you have, except that, okay, let me give you the example that stuck out to me. Volatility, he'll say that vision is the antidote to volatility. It's just interesting that you guys are basically saying almost the same thing.
Yeah, and I don't even know who that guy is.
Yeah, no, I need to make intros. I need to make intros for sure.
He might not even know Jason. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'm all for sitting here in silence, but if somebody has something to say. Jason, is there anything else you feel like we should say about this, if nobody else has any questions?
No, I think that sets it up. I think just for timing wise, we should probably, if we want to get through all 6, we should switch over to the vortex.
Okay. Just to help me with time management, how I forget, how long do we go, Elena?
Sorry, 60 minutes plus Q&A. 60, 90 minutes, you're
Okay.
fine. But the people would drop for the
Okay.
dinner. Dinner is between you and the participants.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. Well, hopefully this didn't scare you off too much, because we're about to get into something that's even deeper. just a fair warning, because we're going to look at the vortex of behavioral patterns. Okay, so if you take those deployable strategies, and you might recognize some things in here on the bottom, but we're going to get to those in a second. If you take those deployable strategies, it's these here: stability, ambition, connection, adaptability. So I think the way we've been thinking about these is that if those are the strategies you can deploy in your organization, and we'll say it again, that you are likely deploying all 4 of these strategies at various times in your organization, given certain contexts or certain pockets of the organization, it means that if that's fueling your system, your organizational system, there is likely some input into that currency or that fuel that's driving your organization or that part of the organization forward. And then there's likely an output to that as well. In the same way that we put gasoline or electricity, or I think hydrogen cars are a thing still. Maybe they're not. I know they're not all that popular if they are. But anyway, whatever fuel you put into a vehicle, when you step on the accelerator, it produces acceleration and torque and all those kind of things, physics type stuff, right? So that's the way we were thinking about the top of this model. So what you put into your system, what's driving it forward as a goal or a strategy, and then what you're going to get out of that system. So those would be the top 3. Then what we did was we thought, well, you know what, there's already some people that have done really amazing work on these ideas. And we're not necessarily saying anything new. We're just trying to put it together in a more cohesive model that puts more than just our ideas and more than just their ideas together. So what we tried to do was to take Bob Anderson's levels of leadership from his Mastering Leadership book. So egocentric leadership to reactive leadership, creative, and then integral leadership. And we tried to take William Schneider's culture and leadership quadrant. So control, competency, collaboration, and cultivation. So those 4 C words. And then, of course, probably the one that's the most popular is Laloux's, what I often refer to as organizational altitudes, although I don't know if that was his official wording that he used in his book. But, conformist, achievement, pluralistic. I always have to stop and say that one nice and plain, because otherwise I screw that word up. And then evolutionary. And if you look at those separate models, you can make some correlations. It's not a super tight correlation. It's a rough, kind of loose correlation, but we think it's pretty solid for the most part. And you can complete the circle too. So if you go back to the top and you say, hey, if we're a company that seeks stability, it's likely the way we believe we're going to get there is by setting standards and then measuring people to those standards, so that requires obedience as an output. Because otherwise, what's the point of the standards? But through that behavioral pattern, we're going to create a culture of control. And that control will lead to conformity in our system, which then will be reinforced and backed up by egocentric leadership, which, by the way, will create the standards and push them down in the organization at the desire of having stability, and then to get the obedience and go around and around and around in a circle. So it tells a story of a set of behavioral patterns around that inner circle that organizations would use if they're seeking conformity and stability. I'm going to stop there for a second too. And see, we went through one circle. Any thoughts or questions there?
I've worked there. I know what that looks like.
Yeah, probably
No,
feels pretty familiar.
I've definitely seen it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, somewhat self-explanatory as you go out, but the next circle. So same thing here. If we are seeking achievement, so we want to be the best at something, what do we need to put into the system to fuel it? Ambition. And to get to ambition, we've got to tell people what it looks like, goals. And the output we're going to get out of that and the way we will measure it will be excellence. We wanted to get to this outcome and we pushed through and got there. Rah, rah, rah. Great for us. That will create behavioral patterns that will contribute to a culture of competence or being the best. And that competence might not result just in external competition, but it may actually result in internal competition too. I don't know if you all worked for companies where the infighting and the competition internally is not productive. It's actually detrimental in some way. All in the sake, or all to try to achieve something. And that outwardly focus, because we're trying to be competitive and we're trying to be the best, is what causes us to also be highly reactive in our leadership skills. Because how will we know what goals to set if we don't know what our competition's doing? How will we know what goals to set and what to achieve if we don't know what's going on in the market? So we wait to see what's happening and then we react to that. And then we do things inside of our organization, but we better do them the best we can because we need to beat those other people, that other company, or we need to make the most money. And then that behavioral pattern, that reactive behavioral pattern goes back to the goal creation, constantly updating goals. Well, maybe not constantly. Some organizations still do it annually. I probably dare say a bunch do still. Other ones have gotten smarter and they're trying to get more iterative with their goals, but they're still focusing heavily on setting goals and then looking at those goals in the rearview mirror to see if they're getting there or not. Not looking out the front windshield where they're driving, but out the back rearview mirror to see where they've been. All right, I'll stop there again too. Everybody okay? We still have a pulse? Everybody's good? Okay. All right, so let's go out another circle. Okay, out here, we've learned something. If we can get to the third circle, we've learned that strict adherence to rules and policies and hierarchies and top-down decision-making that is very strict and turning people into followers, we've learned all that doesn't work so well. So what did we try to do? We tried to take all those followers and stoke them up with ambition. Well, guess what? We also learned that that worked a little bit or in certain situations, but it wasn't consistently holding true. So the next rung of evolution has to be this idea of connection, where we start to trust the people that are in the system to be adults and to work like adults and to collaborate like adults, and that they don't need micromanagement and to being told what all the things that they need to do and how they need to do it and so on. But in order to make that work effectively, to build that level of human connection in the system, they need to have transparency as the currency that's running through that system. Because if we don't have transparency, how will we all know we're doing the things we need to do without management telling us how to do it? This means that teams of people need to start collaborating across their teams and across the organization and doing it on their own without being incentivized or enticed by people in positions of authority. They need to lean into this idea of that human centricity and the connection that comes from it. And through that behavioral pattern, it will create an outcome of belonging. This idea that we belong to the people or to the community that has been built inside of that organization through that human connection. And it will foster a culture of collaboration, which will lead to us actually coexisting, or what Lelou called pluralism, or being pluralistic. And that will cause our leadership style to, stop being reactive to what's going on outside the things that we have control over, and it will actually start to cause us to focus on being creative from the inside out. So we will take our creativity from the inside and we will push it out towards the markets and the industries and our competitors and so on. And we will, in theory, leave them in the dust because we actually don't care all that much about what they're doing. We have a vision. We're creative. We're doing the things that we feel like we need to do given how our customers are responding to the things they're putting in the market. And that creativity then spawns more transparency in the system. And then we can just keep going around the circle again.
Got a couple questions, couple thoughts. I absolutely want to make space for other people. If anyone else wants to jump in. Michael's out. So I'm getting a little bit of spiral dynamics here with the suggestion of a progression. I'm curious about the implied causal relationship. The way you just described it now implies a bottom up. And my experience has been a little bit more that you don't get your leaders shifting with a bottom up change. And I'm curious about that. I'm curious if I'm misreading you, or if you're definitely saying like, no, you can. This is how you get there. If you go bottom up, your leaders will shift. I can't remember seeing leaders shift from reactive to creative.
Yeah. So I actually have this going on right now at the company I'm at. I've been there for 5.5 years. And I always kind of joke with people from time to time that I spent at least four of those years failing inside of that organization with a bottom-up movement. There was a grassroots campaign to try to help the organization become more adaptable. And I think in the past year and a half or so, I think I've started to realize that it just wasn't the right time. I was putting ideas in front of them that they couldn't understand. I was putting, at the very least, I was putting this green and even a bit of the teal we haven't gotten to out here into the system as ideas. And I was putting those ideas in front of people who were living in this inner circle. And to them, these things were completely foreign and they didn't have time for it. They didn't see how it was meant to shift or change what they were doing in their context and the things that they thought they were accountable for. It took me to realize that small pocket of the company that I was in, that I was trying to do this in for those first 4 years, being just not the right place to be. And I actually started to become more disruptive, but not in that group that it wasn't working. But I went and found, if you're familiar with Lean Change and Jason's change personas, I went and found movers from some other part of the company. I just started working in the white space of the organization, and I stopped paying attention to the reporting lines in the department I was supposed to report to. But I had that freedom. Well, actually, my boss probably would have said I didn't have that freedom. But I was at the spot where I just stopped caring because I wanted to do what I knew or what I felt was right. And what I was fairly certain would work. I just needed to find the right people. And then I did. And then we've been working on it pretty well for the past year and a half.
Your gamble paid off.
And it's all bottom up. I mean, literally, we just went to the CEO last Monday on July 8th for the second time in the past year and a half. So a year and a half ago, I went and put some initial ideas in front of our CEO, and she said, well, we don't operate this way now. And I was like, yep, that's why I'm here. And she said, well, if we're going to do these things, you'll have to help us figure it out. And I was like, thank you. That gives me permission. And three, she goes, well, how will we scale this once we can make it work? And a year and a half ago, I was like, yeah, I don't know. I think we're going to have to figure that out. And then I went to her just last week after working on this for a year and a half and getting at least six months of good traction most recently. And she asked the same thing. How are we going to scale this? And I told her at that time, I was like, yeah, well, I said, I kind of know, but it's not in the way you think. Like, we're not going to scale this by like plugging everybody into the matrix and just teaching them to behave better. That's not how this is going to work. And it's not how it's worked so far. It's worked because we're not forcing this on anyone. That's the primary number one. So we're literally taking like the vortex and the how does your system change kind of sense making story, and I'm putting it in front of people who will listen, and I'm just describing the model. That's it. I'm not telling them anything. I'm not trying to say, and look, and here's where we're failing, right? This is why we're failing. No, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just putting the model in front of them and I'm describing it a little bit, and then I'm letting them work through their own understanding and context. And they start having aha moments, and they start doing the, oh, we're here. And maybe that's why this thing isn't working. Or maybe because we're trying to do too much stability stuff and we're turning everybody into followers, and this is why nothing's sticking, or we're not getting the right behavioral patterns, or we're not getting to the outcomes we want. So they start to figure it out themselves. And it's all great. It's all, I'm telling you all that because you asked the question about it needs management support. And yes, eventually it will. And I think for my situation, I'm on the verge of that right now. We're at a spot where we're going to need to get leadership support, but it's going to be bottom up change intelligence that is supported top down, not top down decrees that are pushed down through the organization.
I mean, you feel like the cultural dynamics that get into play when you're at your orange level, right? Even if you just count the bodies at the very, very top, you've got a relatively small number of folks. And if they're mature enough as business leaders, then they can see, okay, we're going to plateau. And if we really want to kick it to the next level, then we got to think differently, yada, yada, yada. So we got to take it up a notch. So I could see them we're seeing the opportunity to shift to, oh, well, if we could be creative, that would be awesome. I feel like the stickiest part is maybe that next layer down, or the middle parts, because there you've reinforced the reward system has reinforced the behaviors that you're calling out.
Yep.
And those folks don't have the power or latitude to just say, cool, I want to be creative. I want to not be a control freak. I want to be a collaborator. Like, and that's where, so anyway, just, I'm curious if you've encountered.
You want to know what? Yeah. You want to know what I did? I went and made a bunch of friends in HR, and I spent 2 years fostering those relationships. And then once these ideas had blossomed and got visually ready, I did the same thing with them. I took these ideas and I set them in front of them, and they have a completely different context. They're HR. They're not the sales. The other people I've been working with is a sales organization. They're not our consulting practice, who has a completely different outlook on the way things work. I took these exact same models and set it in front of our HR people. And they're like, huh, that's interesting. And then they started going at like, oh, I can see this particular HR initiative we've got for this learning and development program and how it's going, and it's here. And we really need it to be over here. And so, I wonder why that is. Why is it that it's up here and we really need it to be down here if we're going to be successful?
HR could be a very strong partner. Very strong partner. Ken, just for the sake of time, we are 40 minutes in.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll leave the juice for the Q&As and try to move on a little bit. Very interesting questions, Alex, and answers.
Yeah. Do people have questions? We want to do questions now, or you're saying we want to do it? We want to leave time for later.
I'm thinking for later, so we will move through the models a little bit more, and then whoever's gonna stay, we're gonna have all the juice in the Q&A, discuss it all.
Oh, okay. Is that why everybody's holding their questions till later?
No, I think it's just kind of like everyone's processing is a dense,
Yeah,
interesting ideas.
deep stuff. Okay. Jason, what do you think we should do with these? You should just hit them at a high level and then see what they have?
Yeah, probably hit each 6, but if you go back to the vortex just for a second,
Yep.
the conversation that we just had was an example of what we would define as the organizational gravity. So what reinforcing structures are in place that is creating the gravity that's keeping us in that inner circle?
Yeah,
and how do we create enough, like the big book was a space metaphor. So how do you create enough escape velocity to move to the next rung in a couple of areas, but trying to have enough fuel to move from stability to adaptability? That's where we start to get into talking about transformation with espoused theory, where we talk about we want these things, but we never take action on them because there's too many reinforcing structures in the gravitational field of whatever rung that we're in that's preventing us from moving out there. So you can start to plot things on this chart about where we believe we're at. And when I say we, whatever system it is you're working with, because this will obviously vary from team to team, department to department, region to region, etc. And where am I showing up as the change agent? So if I'm showing up on the outer edge and we believe what we're seeing is stability, obedience, control, and reinforcing cycles for that, I might have to compromise some of my beliefs to start in that circle. Otherwise, it's candle in the ocean, right? It's noise. And I know I've been there quite a bit, where you think you're being hired to help transform mindsets and beliefs and behaviors in these things, when really all they're behaving like is that they want to optimize a process so teams can write code faster. So it can also be an exercise in congruence, having a conversation around congruence. When we say that word transformation, what is it that we're actually after? And what are your expectations of me as the change agent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things Jason's talking about is the 2 change strategies. So we can come over here and look at that one. This is I use this one a lot, actually. It's one of my favorites, I think. But so what this is saying is, like when Jason just said that, well, what are you really hoping to accomplish by changing all your teams into Scrum teams? Are you just trying to go better, faster, cheaper? Because if so, that's likely optimization type thinking. Because evolution means that you're succeeding in ways you never had before, which then requires you to think differently. But to think differently, it means that you have to behave differently and also have underlying beliefs that are not the ones you used to have. So it's a foundational individual level change at the consciousness level versus, oh, well, we just need to like use different processes, different technology. Maybe we need to reorganize the structures of our organization a little bit, or have different strategies. Those things are all, for the most part, optimization of the system, not evolution of the people or the agents that are going to need to change in the system. And most companies ignore this one over here completely, evolution. And they almost exclusively focus on optimization. And we say it takes both those. Evolution, so succeeding, or well, thinking and doing so that you can succeed in ways you never have before. And optimization of the things that you're doing in your system in order to achieve your outcomes. And then let's see a couple other ones here. There's the 5 levers of change. So the 5 levers of change, it helps us understand what I just said about optimization and evolution. So if you think about strategy, structures, processes, technologies, those are all things that humans create and use. And those things should be optimized. It's true. I looked it up on Google once. But the people is is what the actual organization's made of. And the people need to be treated differently. They need to actually evolve so that they can use the strategy, structures, processes, and technologies in ways they never have before. So they'll succeed in ways they never have before. But that requires them to change their beliefs, requires them to behave differently, requires them to perform different rituals. And ultimately, it gives them different capabilities than they've had before. So it comes down to, okay, you want to change? Which levers do you want to pull? And in which combination? And at which time do you want to pull those levers? Because you don't have to pull them all at the same time. So another sense-making technique.
And then we could talk about consequence of action. So if we choose to pull one or many levers, what's the consequence of ignoring the other ones? And also use it in retrospect. So the last time we went through this, which we'll probably move on to the waves next, this is a good segue. The last time we tried this transformation or this change or whatever, which levers did we focus on and what happened and why? So, okay, well, maybe we ignored people and strategies. We just said, just install framework X and get people to work faster.
Yeah, Jason's talking about this down here. So the 5 waves of transformative change. So this depicts how in the beginning of your change out here, further out in the ocean, the waves are much smoother, but also less impactful. And so out here, the thinking tends to also be less impactful too. It's more superficial, like, oh, well, okay, we used to do these waterfallish type things, and now we want to do this agile thing. Okay, great. We're just going to swap our process over to agile. All right, let's try that. Okay, you may iterate on that change, and it may start to work a little bit better over time. But ultimately, it's likely not solving all of the problems that is around those teams, maybe even within those teams. So you need to try something new. Okay, so then we get to the next level of thinking. It's improved upon that first wave, but it's still superficial. It's still based in process and technology thinking, most likely. Like, hey, we used to do Scrum. We tried that for a while. It didn't work so well. Nobody liked it. So now we're going to do this Kanban thing. It'll work better. It'll help us. It'll fix our problems. And then there's like the change sharks. Change sharks are there to represent the idea that if you can't get beyond the superficial thinking that process and technology will solve your problems, you'll never get to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th waves. Or you'll try so much that and you can't get beyond the sharks that your change will actually die and you'll just stop trying it. Getting to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th waves requires awareness and reflection of varying types. So you first start to become aware of the system. Well, we tried all these things in our team and it worked somewhat, but then we tried these other things and those worked somewhat. And so we've been just kind of keeping the things that are working, getting rid of the things that aren't working, but we also don't have control of everything. So there's lots of organizational problems that are still a problem for us. It's keeping us from being completely effective. Well, that's systemic awareness. You're aware of what's going on in the system and how it's affecting you. That systemic awareness starts to become more collective, meaning that it's not just your group that understands it, but other groups are also starting to feel the same pain in the same way. And now you're starting to get together and talk about it. It's getting to critical mass. And then lastly, it starts to come down to, okay, we're not just going to say it's us or them or how our organization works, but we're actually going to start to focus on ourselves. And if we can improve ourselves as individuals, then collectively things will start to get better.
And it's not necessarily a linear progression through all of these too. Some of the enterprise patterns I've seen is the 12 to 18 month window of riding the first and the second wave continually. So after 12 to 18 months, we get rid of framework X, we buy framework Y. 12 to 18 months later, we fire the VP of X and we hire a new one. We go through it again. Next time we get rid of the consulting firm, we bring in a new one. We keep going through waves 1 and 2. And it's and there isn't just 5, it's continual. It's this was originally inspired from Herbert Blumer's work on social movement theory. So when somebody is upset with the status quo and they shake something up, you start an emergence. So things about what you want to do start to emerge. People start to try things. People start to try to get other people on board for things. It's chaotic, it's messy, some things are working, it's not very structured. And then we hit a point of coalescence and we feel the need to add a little more structure. Okay, we're now going to create an agile COE because we need structure. We can't just have these teams running amok in the organization. And then we can take that construct too far. And if we go back to the vortex, if we value standards, our COE implements and pushes standards on teams. And we end up in bureaucratization, which is we've used our old values and culture to try to transform to a new state. And then we ultimately end up in decline and the sharks eat us and we end up at the bottom of the ocean. So we've got a choice to, in decline, there's a few different stages, but it's cyclical. It happens continually. It's continual evolution that organizations go through. And this tries to help give you a pattern to say, well, what have we done in the past? Where do we think we're at? And why are we still surfing on wave number 2? And then now you can go back to the 5 levers or the 2 strategies and say, well, maybe optimization is just the best we can do right now. So let's stop talking about transformation. And that's a victory. So all these things are kind of, the sense-making part is you hit something in one of the models and you go, well, we've got this dynamic, so I'm going to hop over to the 3 agilities. I just did that to segue to the 3 agilities.
Okay.
And maybe that can help us explain something.
You're like, wake up, Ken, wake up. Okay, got it. Yeah. Yeah, this one tends to be pretty straightforward. So I'll just say a few things. I believe that most of the agile world thinks agile is just this right here, these green ones. Hey, we'll help your team better. We'll help you become more product led, and we'll help you with your technical excellence. And I think a lot of coaches tend to coach just to those 3 things. And so I've been in enough organizations to realize that when we just focus on those things, we're only focusing on optimization, and we're probably not great at changing. We're just good at installing things. And oh, by the way, leadership's not even on board with what really needs to be done to get us really good at this stuff over here. So the 3 agilities is really about trying to say that agility is a characteristic of the people that reside in an organization. It's a set of behavioral patterns that get you to outcomes. And in order to make that effective, you got to get really good at being adaptable. You're most likely going to need to evolve to get better at adapting over time. And you're going to need to sustain that behavioral pattern because things aren't slowing down. And in order for delivery agility, which is we're very familiar with, and how I just described change agility, we've got to create an environment in our organization for change agility and delivery agility to succeed. And that requires leadership to change how they're operating. And it's the most difficult part. I get it. But to help them start to see, it's not just about their management competence. It's actually about how they show up. It's about how they manage the system. It's about not managing the people. All of those kind of things should help with change agility and leadership agility. So that's the 3 agilities. And then just 2 more here real quick. The 5 universals is obviously a staple of lean change, been around for a long time now. I drew it differently for these. And the reason why I drew it differently was because I wanted to put extra emphasis on cause and purpose over urgency. Because in my opinion, to do these inner circles well, you gotta have a pretty clear kind of line of sight on cause and purpose. Because if urgency comes in, it's going to cause you to start to operate in the outer set of circles. So broadcasting information at people via surveys and emails, and here's what you need to do in order to make this change in the next 60 days kind of thing.
This is about switching your lenses for how you look at change. So I valued standards, but Ken used the vortex to point to the adaptability layer to tell me I was incorrect. So that's why he drew it a different way. So we decided not to value standards and didn't use the same design.
Right. Remember, I'm a disruptor.
So this was born out of behavioral patterns when I first started traveling around and working in different companies and running workshops from 2014 to 2020 before everything was locked down. And all of these represent patterns in organizations that, in the most unscientific way possible, seemed to be better at change than others. So we want this to be science. We want this to be a set of repeatable steps, but it's impossible. So this was things like companies that focused more on creating meaningful dialogue. And one of a multinational bank in the Nordics that I worked with for about 3 or 4 years on and off, the CEO would do 50-person roundtables for like the first 6 months of their first wave of transformation to collect from people how things were working. What problems should we be focused on? But it was always focused on dialogue. We would run sessions twice a year with 200-300 people where we would get input about whatever the particular strategic objectives were at the time. Great dialogue. We would run a whole bunch of interactive sessions. We'd create change canvases, go off and run, come back, do retrospectives. But everything was focused on experimentations as opposed to just, making sure the tasks were checked. And the one powerful thing that the CEO and the CTO would always say was, we'll be retired before this transformation is over. This is a generational thing. This isn't a year-long program that we're going to run and check all the boxes. So they had all of these things. They had a co-creative approach. They focused on experimentation, creating meaningful dialogue. They had a strong purpose. So that's one of many stories from that 7 or 8 years of traveling that created this 5 universals. And it's called universals. Some people call it principles, but it's universals because it's shit we can all understand, right? Like, who's had a new boss or a new neighbor ever? And did you Google what's the 5 steps to ensure successful ROI with new neighbor? No. Like, if you're in Canada, you bring over some donuts and beer and you go, how's it going, eh? And you introduce yourself. That's a universal thing we all know how to do. But somehow when we go into our organizations as change agents, we forget how to be human. And we forget change lives or dies based on relationships, not frameworks and steps and stuff. So that's kind of the short history of how this thing came to be. Each of these 5 have 6 or 7 philosophies attached to them. That we're going to have a couple of online games and stuff that are going to come out pretty soon to tinker around with.
There's a question in the chat, Jason. I wonder if you want to tackle real quick, because it comes up every time I think we talk about the universals. Do you see it?
Yeah. Just don't call them experiments. Yeah, I've had people say we do experiments. We just don't call them that because nobody likes that word.
What other words have you come across?
Just call it a task. Just call it a task and say, we're going to do these 5 actions and here's the outcome we think we're going to get. Here's how we're going to measure it, whether or not this was successful. So just use the language that speaks to the organization, but you're still running an experiment and you're using the ideas behind experimentation.
Yeah, and then you can joke with your buddies that you're full in management too. So it's fun.
Cool, thank you.
All right, last one here. Okay, so I feel like we often do leave this one to the last, but yet it's probably one of the most important ones, I think, because it kind of gets the whole thing started. But I think you kind of got to understand a bit about the other stuff before we kind of then work. So these are the 4 dimensions of change. Most folks that I've come across, at least anyway, and a lot of organizations I've worked with, because they focus on process and technology and the 5 levers so much, and they kind of look at people and they'll say, okay, well, we're changing processes. So, you're instead of pushing this button, or following these steps in order to approve an expense report or something, you're now going to go into this system and push these other buttons and do these things, and it routes this way. Okay, great. That's a technology and process change. But the way we treat the human beings in that equation is essentially like a robot. Here's your new set of instructions. So when they live on this right side the most, the science of change, they're going to look at the tools and practices, and that's the thing that they're going to swap out. Or the big ideas, in this case, I'm going to call them strategies. So the way that they look at those things, they're going to be like, oh, we'll just shuffle these shells around, and then we'll just tell the people the new instructions that they have. In the meantime, what they're doing is they're ignoring the center of that 5 levers, which is the left side of these 4 dimensions, because it's the part that's the human part. It's the who am I as an individual, and what are the beliefs that I have about how this place works and how I'm going to succeed and how the people around me are going to interact with me and how they're going to help me succeed and how I'm going to help them succeed. And how should I show up in that environment, or what stance should I take, or what stances should I know how to take? And how do I apply those stances in those various contexts in order to get the greatest likelihood of succeeding with not only my interactions and my influence, but also the collective outcomes that we're trying to get to as a group or as a department or as an organization. And so this tries to help us see the 2 sides of the change, and not to just focus on one side or the other, or not to focus on the part that's comfortable, which is generally the right side, but to actually inspect ourselves on the left side, so that we can do the right side even better than we ever have before, because it'll start to help us evolve the way we think, and we'll succeed in ways we never have before. Okay. There we go. Jason, anything to add? Otherwise, we said all the things.
I think that's good for all the things.
There was one other piece up here, but it gets kind of lengthy, so maybe we'll hold for now. I don't know how much more time we have.
I'll put something in the chat that you can check out later about the 4 dimensions, which is like a periodic table of elements. So that's in the chat. If you want to go a little bit deeper into that, because it's probably the biggest topic. It's not, I don't think it's the deepest, but it's the biggest.
Okay, what shall we do from here? Not that we had anything planned today, but we don't have anything else planned.
Yep.
Well, from here, I would just invite you to have like a glass of water for all the talking. I launched the poll just for the event feedback, and I invite everyone to gather their question, and I'll stop recording and we're just gonna sit and talk. I have quite a few questions, so I'm excited about asking them.
I saw in the chat earlier, Spade was here. If I'd have realized he was here, I would have at least acknowledged that a good bit of this stuff I learned from not just Jason, but him as well. So.
Well, you did that now, so that's fine.
Once he's gone and the recording's on. So good. That's exactly the way I planned it.
All right. So I have 20 participants and 10 responses. I would like to have more, feedback helps, guys. Don't be lazy. Questions. All right.
I actually have a question about the wave down below, the wave model, because usually, again, it's kind of like a lot of things, then maybe the things are more right to left than left to right. But in traditional leadership, you always say, you start with self-assessment and then you move on to going with the team and then, going with the processes and going with the system. But you said that the personal awareness was the last thing to get to the increasing impact. So I was really curious about that because it kind of, again, it's like, you know, the left to right thinking of my brain, it was a little bit different than traditional leadership training.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we make mental models, they tend to be linear. I'm not gonna lie, but here's the thing I like about it is that we drew it as waves, and you know how the ocean works. I mean, it doesn't just you know, send water towards the shore. That's part of it, but there's undercurrents, you know, there's all kinds of things that are going. There's the moon, which comes around and then changes the tides and all kinds of stuff. So in theory, you know, you could start at any one of these positions, and the water could take you out and the water could take you back in. And so it really does kind of depend. We tend to tell the story from left to right in that linear way, just because it does make logical sense to go through it that way the first time. But yeah, there isn't any right or wrong way to think about it after that first logical pass.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, you could argue all of it's part of the system, but that's when I was seeing this and seeing that me was at the very right. Usually I see that as the first thing that you're supposed to do is do, you know, because you're always doing the assessments or you do the 360 or whatever it happens to be when you go into a lot of times to do a transformation, and then you start to work on the team, and then you start to work on the processes, and then you get the system. So that was the only remark that I had about this, but it is, I love the graphics, though. I love the sharks.
One of the things in the 4 dimensions, one of the ideas in the 4 dimensions is also related to how change happens in your organization. And the 2 metaphors from Jerry Weinberg are dropping change through the hole in the floor versus diffusion. And we tend to drop the change through the hole in the floor. So when we're in the inner circle, the thinkers have decided what this is, and they drop it through the hole in the floor, and we pick it up. And then now we've already been given the solution. And then now we go and do our readiness assessments, and now we go start talking to people and stuff. But it's already been predetermined what that change is, as opposed to diffusion, which is very much what Ken was describing with Stories from Insight. He was basically running amok in the organization and just diving in all the open windows when people wanted to listen. And then now they're listening.
Got it. Thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah, just took a while to get there.
Yep. And it is, you know, you can imagine, especially when you're in an enterprise context, when you talk about scaling or how we're going to do this, it's very easy to latch on to a process model or a change management model that gives you the illusion of certainty that, well, we have to plan it, we have to do an assessment, and know if people are ready for this. But if we're using the dropping change through the hole in the floor metaphor, why are we even doing an assessment? We've already decided. We've already created the scorecards. We've already had the closed doors with all the leaders, and we've put stuff on their scorecard and performance management to adhere them to what this transformation is. So what if the assessment comes back and says nobody's ready? Well, you're going to do it anyway, because we've already carved it out. We've already got budget. We've already created a schedule. So all of these 6 ideas, you can kind of plug those things in, especially into your organizational gravity in the vortex model. And now you can start to scenario test and talk about consequences. So it's there, I guess, you know, I always think of these things as, how do we make more of a conscious and more informed decision about the actions we take, instead of taking the easy way out? Well, let's, you know, make the strategic pillars, create some PowerPoints, send everybody through training, steamroller, run a pilot, rinse and repeat. Because it's easy to do that. It's easy to say that. It's easy to plan that. And deep change is freaking hard.
Yeah, it gets back to the 5 universals, in my opinion, because most leaders don't have the mental capacity to understand. I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm not saying that. Don't read into that. But I'm just saying, like, their way the world works is that, okay, we decide we are going to do something, and that here's the outcome we're going to get. Okay, now make it happen. And that shouldn't take longer than like 6 months to a year. And So this idea of organic change that moves at the natural pace of the organization, not at the urgency of leadership, is a completely foreign idea to them. And in some cases, maybe even a lot of cases, they won't even support the idea of that kind of organic change because it just doesn't make any sense to them. So that's what you have to keep working against, and trying to find ways to keep changing while you're trying to what's the best way I could describe it? Like keep chipping away at the idea of leadership and how they behave, because you just got to admit this idea that you're not going to change that quickly.
You can even go an extra step and think about, how did we get to where we are today? 10 years ago, did we make a plan to get to the state that we're at right now that requires us to transform? Probably not. It happened through thousands and tens of thousands of events that we reacted to. Production went down. All right, no more developer access to production. It's going through Verge, the ops guy. That was a real story. And Verge would not let us deploy ever. Saturday nights is our window. All right, there's a process that shaped our release schedule. Then production went offline and Verge got in trouble. Well, shit, now what are we going to do? Well, we need redundancy. So they went off and spent, $300,000 on a monstrosity of redundancy that almost bankrupted the company. Well, that didn't really work right. So Verge got fired. So it's these events over time that compounded, and Ken's one mentioned cruft. All the cruft that gets built onto the organization, right? And all the algae on the rocks and stuff gets built up over time. We didn't intentionally plan that. So we can't really plan our way out of it, but we can be intentional about how we respond to events that happen in our organization, whether it's stuff that our competitors do or things that happen internally. We can be more intentional about dealing with these things, but we can't plan our way out of what we didn't plan our way into in the first place.
Yeah, and Juan is this chief technical officer of North America at the company I work for.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, Jason, did you take back bacon and maple donuts over to Verge or Vern, whatever the guy's name was?
I probably should have. Then maybe we would have been able to deploy.
Maybe then he would have let you deploy during the week, yeah, and not just on Saturday night. Yeah.
But that's the catch-22, right? We didn't plan our way into this mess. We can't plan our way out of it, but we can't not have some kind of plan. You can't go into a leader's office and say, well, we'll just experiment with a bunch of stuff and hope for the best. You've got to have something. And that's the fun part about being the change agent, is how do you balance the need that leaders have for certainty? And it's justified because at an enterprise level, you're spending millions or tens of millions of dollars on transformation in either consultants or people, and loss of revenue while things are slowing down while you're trying to change. It's big and expensive, and it's reasonable for them to ask for that stuff. So the goal with these sense-making models is there a better way we can go about that by doing it in a more co-creative way with them? Because they're not stupid, just like Ken said, right? I've never met any C-level who's not, they're all smart. They're there for a reason. And I think we underestimate and forget the pressure they're under a lot of the times. So when they're pushing for a plan and pushing for how to scale this, they've got bosses too. They've got a board to report to. And I think we don't have enough empathy for some of those leaders sometimes. We just think they don't get it because, they just want a plan on paper. And hopefully this will lead us into better conversations.
Yeah, I think they just don't have space in their brains right now. That's what I was saying. The mental capacity they have is full. Like their RAM is full.
Mm-hmm.
They just have too much stuff going on.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a conversation with one of the SVPs in one of the banks here in Canada. And the gist of it was basically, we've got to deliver something because the banking industry in Toronto is small. And if I get labeled as the executive that can't deliver, I ain't getting a job anywhere else. Like I'm out and I'm labeled and that's it. So there's real, fear and stuff that's influencing how they're behaving and pushing and pushing. And it just, it makes it a lot more difficult to try to come with a message of, we need time, we need to sense make things. So all these factors, a framework can't help you fight through that.
Right. Yeah, and Jason was just describing behaviors that are down here in the stability.
Mhm.
So like, hey, if I get labeled as that thing that people don't like, then I won't have a job in this town again. So therefore, I'm going to take the safe route. Or I'm going to use control to make sure that I can control this situation, which in turn, they're going to turn everybody else into followers.
Mhm. And they've been rewarded for it. People will act in a way that they've always been rewarded for.
Okay.
Yep.
Quiet group. Is the question time now?
It is the question time now. Let me just stop the recording.
I think the PowerPoint said it's networking time now. So
Yay.